for coming out on this chilly LA night. I am very excited to invite to the stage the director of this film and my old friend Peter Nix.
Hey Kim. First of all, you all had the choice going to see Rod Wave or coming here, and you made the right choice. Thank you. I love you forever.
So, for those of you who don't know, this is the third film in a trilogy that Pete's been doing up in Oakland, all of which actually you can watch now on Hulu. So, if you haven't watched the earlier two, The Weight Room and The Force, I highly recommend going home and watching them because they're all interconnected. And Pete, let's talk a little bit about the decision to do a trilogy and how you ended up picking what is the trilogy and how did you end up with this as the third?
It really did. It started with The Waiting Room. I came out. I went to the film program at Cal, Go Bears, and my wife was finishing her master's in speech pathology at Cal State. It was Cal State Hayward at the time. Now it's Cal State East Bay, and her first job was at Highland Hospital. And she's a refugee from Laos, and a lot of the patient population there are sort of refugees, uninsured, people from East Oakland, very diverse, patient population that she really related to, and she would come home and tell me stories about their journey. And I was just immediately drawn as a storyteller that felt that would be a great stage to make a film, and so that began my journey of trying to. At a time when the debate around access to healthcare was at such a kind of fevered pitch on a sort of political level, and people who had access to the microphone were politicians or media pundits or so forth, and sort of intuitively feeling that there was a story to be told sort of more on the front lines, and what better place to try to capture that story than public hospital waiting room, which basically this waiting room was this entire community's primary care physician, and really being grateful to have a little bit of a head start with the cultural competency and language through Vana, my wife, and developing that relationship with the community. And one of the first people we met before we made the film, we just had hours of conversations. We actually did this digital storytelling project where we interviewed people in the waiting room and allowed them just to express their wants and needs. And one of the first people that we talked to was a young girl who had been shot outside her middle school at Edna Brewer Middle School, and she was not in class. She was in a hospital waiting room, stuck for hours waiting to get treatment for a gunshot wound. And knowing that I couldn't fully tell her story with this film, that was always in the back of my mind, and thinking about the agency of the community, her story, her journey as it relates to access to healthcare, as it relates to education, as it relates to the criminal justice system, and those became kind of the three pillars. And I believe that the trilogy was kind of born that year when I was doing the research, and I started a nonprofit and began laying the foundation for what has sort of landed with this third film.
It seems to me like each of the films you were sort of prescient. You were in this place right before everything blew up. So in the second film, The Force, you are with the police in Oakland long before George Floyd. Of course, the Black Lives Matter movement was already underway as his police force was kind of sinking under its own controversies. And then in this film, you happen to start filming right before everything went off the rails with COVID and with the police. That I'm interested in hearing your perspective a little bit about that juxtaposition and how the interconnection between the film you did on The Force and this one, and then also with the perspectives. Like with The Force, we are in there with the police, and I'm sure you got flack for that, for fully humanizing the police. And in this film, we're fully in with this.
They're coming out.
Yeah. And in this one, we're fully in with the students. So how did you make those decisions, and what kind of feedback have you gotten about it over the years?
I mean, part of the value proposition of the work is access and permanence in a way, like sticking around. Like a lot of filmmakers, a lot of documentarians, we're very attracted to shiny objects.
Yeah.
And that thing could be, in Syria, it could be in Beirut, it could be, in New York City. We go to where the story is, and we often parachute in, make our films, and leave. And this notion of staying put within a community and thinking about the interconnectedness of that community and what that story could tell, that grand narrative, always kind of attracted me. Partly inspired by The Wire, sort of how sort of David Simon sort of extended his work as a writer and a journalist, and allowed that to inform what became The Wire. That was the result of access. In order to really fully tell that story, you have to build trust, you have to stick around, you have to allow yourself to be held accountable. And all of those things started to kind of add up, the longer I did the work. And by the time we finished The Waiting Room, the film came out, it did very well. It people loved the film. And so when I went to approach the Oakland Police Department, that gave them some degree of trust that I would tell a full story. And it might not be the story that they necessarily wanted to be told, but it would be a full story. And so that really that value of staying around, and the fact that big twist. I don't know if you haven't seen The Force, I won't totally. There's a pretty significant thing that happens in the movie that was in some ways maybe unexpected, but when you stick around long enough, something like that's inevitably going to happen. And I think we've been having these conversations, for a long time, and these incidents keep happening. And the fact that, this film, which Homeroom, when we began it, we had no intention of it necessarily dovetailing with the issue of the police. It happened because these are things that are continually turning in our communities in terms of the consequences of a sort of dysfunctional system. And so it's not totally surprising that the events dovetailed with The Force, although we didn't find out until it was because of COVID that we sort of found the narrative in the film, actually.
Interesting. In this film, each of the films, they're focusing on a different institution, and they're all verite. But in each time you're making choices, and one of the choices you made in this film that I really love is the way you were just with the students, and that the adults in the world, they're like the weather. They kind of come in and go.
Peanuts swamp.
Yeah, like peanuts.
We're actually initially it was going to be like we had, because I like to set rules like boundaries, like we're not going to let anyone speak. What would happen if we informed from an adult? And ultimately we couldn't fully do that, but that was a sort of idea that we had from the outset.
Yeah. Did you get tempted in the midst of it did you find teachers that were irresistible or other people, or was it just easy to follow that rule once you were in with these kids?
We didn't really try to, it's so funny to say like the word casting when you talk about a documentary, but that's basically what you're doing. With an ensemble, we knew it was going to be an ensemble. We initially, the film, I'm a dad raising, two kids. My daughter was struggling with mental health issues. She had been since the third grade. And being someone who grew up on all these movies of the 80s, Breakfast Club and all that stuff, I wanted to take that model and apply it to these sort of kids of color who are dealing with very particular issues: generational trauma, housing, food insecurity, racism, climate change, all these things that are on that social media. What is that world? And so that had me very focused on meeting as many kids as I could, talking to as many kids as I could, seeing the teachers and the sort of infrastructure around them, the system more as like a, backdrop. And we were initially very focused on this center at the school called Shop 55. It initially was dovetailing more with the waiting room, because a lot of these kids aren't insured, they're immigrants, or they're undocumented, they're not comfortable speaking about what's going on with them in terms of depression or anxiety. And then the school had this clinic where kids could come and share and talk to a counselor and, say things that they wouldn't ordinarily say to their parents or a teacher. And we were following that we were embedded in that center. And obviously COVID happened, and we hadn't fully developed all those character arcs of the kids that we were following in there, so we had to shift. That was the initial kind of focus, is basically the emotional life of these young people. What is it like to be a young person today? What are they dealing with, and how are they coming of age?
So when did you shift to the kids that you're following now?
We sort of had archetypes of just like the Breakfast Club. Like we had like, the jock, we had the nerd, we had the, straight A kid, and the leader, the stoner, the dropout. And we met Adolescent sort of early on, and we found out that he sat on the school board as a student representative, representing all the students in the school district. And I found that to be fascinating, and sort of just felt that if we followed him and his cohort of friends, like Dwayne Davis and Jessica and all those other kids who were kind of in his cohort, that they would lead us to something. And if we just went to those we had been to enough school board meetings and city council meetings over the years through all of our films. So those meetings are a shit show, like always, and
God,
we
crazy.
you have no idea, like there's a whole other film that we could cut from those scenes. And so we knew that he was going to be one of the characters, but we didn't want to just follow the leaders, the kids who were going up, Harvard and all that stuff. It's just that when COVID hit, we discovered that one of the things that they had been working on from day one, we actually found it in our footage, was trying to get the police. There's a dedicated police department within the school district that's separate from the Oakland Police Department. It's dedicated, and that they were trying to eliminate that.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID hitting. And I don't know if any of you guys had to deal with this if you're filmmakers, but what a crazy time to film. How did you keep going? How did you, filmically it's exciting, because I feel like for me, it's so great to leave the school and to go see their homes and to their families for a minute. And that was something I didn't expect. But I'm sure it was just a scramble.
There's so many things that are, I don't know, profound or meaningful about this movie that defy explanation. And one of them obviously is, losing our daughter at the, outside of filming. She died of a drug overdose, and we had to make the decision to continue the project. And I made the decision to keep going. We had hired the crew. They actually helped put on the memorial service for Karina. We stopped filming for about a month. And then it was just collectively, we just felt it was the right thing to do, is to keep moving forward. And so that was already happening. My personal trauma, my personal loss, the team's loss. And when COVID hit, and it wasn't like it hit overnight. There was like this slow burn that was happening where we kind of saw it coming. And when class was finally canceled, as you saw on the film, it was almost like a snow day. The kids, even us, thought maybe it was just going to be a couple of weeks. But for me at the time, because I was dealing with my own, situation, I was more like in a fog. And normally I shoot my own films This one, Sean, my producer, shot the film. He did a phenomenal job, and so I was less kind of involved in the day to day. And then when it happened, we were just like everyone else, just trying to like figure out what to do, what are the rules. We did stop filming for a time. Everything was on Zoom, and then we did notice that the leadership kids were still organizing. They were still trying to push this initiative through to get the police out of school so we could capture those Zoom meetings. They were communicating with each other on Zoom, like telling happy birthday, supporting each other, and we could start to sense and then it went from 2 weeks to 3 weeks to a month to beyond. It started sinking in, and that's when we knew like the film was going to change. The story arcs that we were working on initially, we couldn't land the plane, so to speak, with those kids because we hadn't developed the storylines, and so we had to sort of retreat. And we didn't do a lot of IRL filming after COVID hit. We did a little bit strategically. We picked some days to go. We kind of stayed across the room. We were on long lenses, and we just sort of did our best, and we just kind of kept pushing on.
I didn't think about that from an editorial perspective. Of course, it must have just ended other storylines. I mean, how many kids were you following in the beginning?
We were tracking roughly about 20 kids, and we had started the process the year prior. We had started screening our films all over the community, to parents, to teachers, to kids, basically trying to tell our story because we knew we were going to sort of ask for access at some point and sort of need to talk to parents, teachers, kids, and so we had developed this relationship. These relationships started, and then the prior summer we basically spent summer school kind of meeting kids and trying to see if there were any standouts, and there were the kids, just remarkable kids. And if you notice in the movie, like their grades aren't great, their SAT scores aren't great, but these are some of the most gifted, creative, remarkable kids I've ever met. But they're and part of like a little subtext of the movie is that we have this distorted sense of how we value the potential of young people who come from whatever you want to call them, schools in the hood or underserved schools or what have you. We were very fascinated by how these kids kind of like lived on the fringes, and because of their life experiences just had remarkable ways of being, and it was very hard actually to choose the characters, but we COVID forced us to sort of get focused on a specific storyline, and luckily for us, the kids had this initiative. It was underway. It was continuing. They pushed through, and we realized that in the wake of what they lost, they were finding their voice. They were finding themselves. They were literally coming of age, right before us, and then it was clear that was the film.
Yeah, I feel like of the three films, this is the most optimistic. And in a way, I don't know. Actually, this raises another question: is this the last film in the series, or is there a chance you'll do more?
I guess when you call something a trilogy, it feels like it can only be three. It's interesting because in some of the reviews of the movie, not that I read the reviews of my movies like often, but every once in a while I'll check them out. And reviewers, critics spoke of it in different ways. Some people called it a very loose trilogy. Like, what makes a trilogy? Is it a thematic relationship between the movie? Is it a narrative through line that continues through the movie? Is it simply filming in one city make it a trilogy? So it's something that I've thought a lot about, and we are going, the work will continue, particularly as it relates to, because of my experience with my daughter. These were a lot of my daughter's friends. This was the year that she was supposed to graduate, and I feel there's unfinished business there for me as a dad, both as a storyteller, to tell the story of young people's emotional lives, which is a very complex reality right now. This past year, we had the highest number of deaths, overdose deaths in history. Suicide rates are extremely high. There's one of the highest rates of young people reporting loneliness than we've ever had. And so that is a space that, yet at the same time, they are our future. They are in possession of a set of skills and a sort of agency that is remarkable and unprecedented, really. And I think they're of this generation that we've seen, like with the Parkland kids, Greta Thornburg, like kids like there's a remarkable Malala. There's this, and it's global, and so there's something there that I feel, I still need to tell. Whether it's set in Oakland, I'm not sure, but it's going to be born, of this project.
I mean, that sort of connects with me to the social media aspect, the decision to include a lot of their screens. And can you talk a little bit about that decision and why you chose to do that, and what it means positively and negatively for these kids?
We were going to do a lot more with that. You saw little bits and pieces of it, and there's one girl you may have seen in the beginning, Ty. She's kind of like an Instagram influencer. She's got 50,000 followers. Some of these kids have 200,000 followers. To be a young person, to have that degree of reach at that kind of age, we found to be remarkable. And looking at that sort of threshold between how you're presenting yourself through these platforms and sort of what's going on inside you emotionally and what's the relationship between those two is something that we wanted to explore, and we were starting to explore. And so that's something that we're probably going to get into with this next piece, which is probably going to be a series looking at adolescent mental health, getting into the emotional world, but also revealing going back to the waiting room of looking at the deficiencies of the system, because the adolescent mental health system in this country is fundamentally broken, and that's probably the next part of the journey of where this trilogy is going to lead me next in terms of storytelling. But we were going to do much more of that, and we collected. You talked to my assistant editor, like she's a hero for the amount of footage and social media that we collected and we worked with in the edit that didn't make it into the film. It's pretty remarkable. So.
Not to get too in the weeds, but I really love the sound design. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, particularly in the beginning, the way you're entering this school and you sort of hear the teachers talking, and then it just gets subsumed by the kids and the phones, and the way it focuses us in different times on different things. Is that something that how much of that gets built in the edit with you?
We talked about a lot. I usually, when I begin a project, I sort of just set out some basic values of things that we want to keep in mind. What is the film about, and exploring the emotional lives of young people in a rapidly changing world. That was the thing that I put up on the board prior to everything happening, and it remained relevant throughout the whole project, and we stayed very focused on that. And then another thing was, in terms of documentary filmmaking in particular, I think sound is often underutilized in storytelling. And we just happened to get lucky that Rebecca Adorno came on later. We had two great editors, but Rebecca came on later, and she's kind of like a specialist in sort of like, she's a kind of a mad scientist with sounds and thinking about ways that they can help articulate the emotional worlds of the characters and the landscape and all that. So we knew from the early on that we wanted to play with that.
It's great. I want to watch it again and just focus on the sound. But the other thing, I really loved the music throughout. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the original song that's in this and how that came about.
Yeah, it's funny because each film I've done has had a different composer, and one of the things I like to do once you get into sort of having like an assembly, and the fiction writers talk about this a lot, like, the characters start speaking and I have to obey the characters. And I kind of approach my films the same way, which is the film will start asking for things. The film will start articulating an identity, and you have to honor that. And you can't impose too much of your will. I mean, I know we like to be auteurs and everything, but you can't impose. I don't usually like to impose too much of my will on the film. That's why if you look at the trilogy, each film is distinct. It doesn't have a very, very clear common. Maybe if you look at the cinematography because of the way I shoot, but
For sure.
each film wants a different thing. And The Waiting Room had very little music. It was very sparse.
Yeah.
The Force had very dramatic music.
Yeah.
This one, it was the most Oakland film I knew I was going to make. Probably why it has that more of an optimistic feel. And my daughter was a singer, and I wanted to do an original song for the movie. We originally approached, I think first we approached Zendaya, and her agents were like, "It's a documentary? What? Like, what are you talking about?" And then no offense, Zendaya, I love you. You're great. But she's from Oakland. Kaylani was interested, and she was too busy. And then it dawned on me, I had gone to a show with my daughter at Yoshi's, which is a jazz club in Jack London Square in Oakland. And it was a singer who was a little bit older named Guapole, who I loved. And I thought my daughter would love, and she had never heard of her, and I took her, and she's like, "Oh, Dad, I really love her. She's a very soulful voice. She's very Oakland. She's got kids of the age," and we approached her, and she wanted to do it. And so we decided to, do an original song for the film, partly to sort of deepen this sort of idea of representing Oakland in a way and telling Oakland's story, given that we were completing the trilogy.
That's great. I think we have a thing to show you regarding that song now.
We're gonna watch the music video. So we shot this after we finished the film. We had recorded the song for the film, and we decided to make a music video of it because it was so poignant. Like when we were actually shooting the video. Just because I knew my daughter would love it. She was a singer, and a lot of her friends were able to come, and you're going to see a lot of her friends in the video. But just the way that we were able to kind of deepen the story a little bit of the film was something I'd never been able to do with the film before, and it was just really, really exciting. And Hulu supported the idea, and I'm really grateful to them for that.
That's great. Let's check it out.
Clinton Tavares is a very gifted young director. People are comparing him to the next Ryan Coogler.
Wow, that was great. I think, you guys, I think that's it, but I think we're going to hang around a bit here if you have questions and want to come on up and chat, right?
That sounds good.
Yeah, I think this ends the official conversation and opens the unofficial conversation.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you everybody for coming out. It's really appreciated.